So, as I was stating yesterday, the ma- the biggest part of the interview, obviously, will be the interview questions. There are three different types of interview questions: general interview questions, behavioral interview questions, and stress related questions. We are most familiar with general information questions. Those are the questions that ask questions like, tell me about yourself. Why did you choose this job? Um, what are some of your strengths? What they really want to know, in addition to you walking them briefly through your career, is why did you choose that company? When you choose a company in your career, it's very different from just choosing a company, in a non-career. Most career jobs want to feel like that particular position is a part of your career progression. Years ago, I know when I first got out of the military, for example, when we went to jobs, the expectation was that you were going to stay at that job 20 years, 15 years, however long. So oftentimes you were assigned a mentor, and that mentor would, work with you, they would be assigned to you from HR. After HR had sat down with you and talked through your career. I remember when I first got out of the military, I worked at a company called Fujisawa Healthcare. And within 60 days, they sat me down with HR. They wanted to know what my long-term career goals were. They wanted to know how they can be, helpful. They assigned me a mentor and they put me on a career path right out of the gate. Those days are long gone. Companies stopped doing that. Turnover, especially with technology, became a little bit more higher. Now people stay at jobs maybe 3 to 5 years. That's the norm. So they don't even, a lot of companies don't even spend money in development, right? They kind of expect you to come there already developed, already with your education. So you're in charge of your own, career progression. What they do expect, though, is that you've made a conscious decision to come to their company and that their company is a part of your career progression. So when they ask you a general question like, tell me about yourself, and why this position, they kind of just want to know why that company. So here's how you answer that question. What you're going to do, you're going to walk them through your resume. If you don't have a lot of hard skills, you're going to focus on the soft skills. As a electrician, for example, maybe you had an uncle that had his own business and this is a smaller company and you want to work there because maybe you want to own your own business one day. So I would start with that. I would talk about maybe if you helped your uncle on the weekends or maybe you helped him during the summer and he got you really interested in contract work, especially electrical work, and be as honest as possible. Then, you know, tell them you had that spark as you started, working and touch briefly. Yeah, I worked in sales and insurance or whatever you did, or I worked with a utilities company. Talk about the soft skills, that they're interested in. Like, let's say they were interested in teamwork. We did a lot of teamwork projects, whatever you need to say about that. Don't spend too much time on those, but just mention those soft skills and then get right into it. I decided to go ahead and make the commitment to go back to school to get into electrical. I wanted to work at a company that had these type of, qualities, name the qualities that they have, because you feel like it would be a great fit for your career. That's all they really want to know with those general questions. Like, however you start that conversation, always land on, and this is why I'm at this company because, this company is ideal for me to, my next step. That's all they really want to hear. The next set of questions, so they may ask one or two questions, but if you answer the first question, especially if they start out with, why are you here? If you answer it and close it out with, why you're at their company. They may not even ask you a follow-up question, unless it's just, something that you said that caught their interest. They'll move on very quickly to either talking to you about their company, or they may even start with talking to you about the company. And then they'll move into what we call behavioral type questions. Now, these questions are going to be, you know, presented to you in the past tense because they're designed to get feedback on how you behave at work. Most times it has something to do with soft skills. These behavioral type questions, especially if you don't have experience, are going to center around how you would react to a situation. Most times it's going to have something to do with a customer, a coworker, or your boss. This is where having that piece of paper or that little small notepad with you is going to be important, because what I like to do is put like a little cheat sheet for me to remember what story I'm going to tell when they ask me behavioral type questions, because it's going to have to do with something in the past. You'll know you're in the behavioral question phase of the interview because the question will start with, tell me about a time when. That's when oh, okay, so they're going to ask me questions about, something I've done in the past. Again, if you've never done the work before, they're going to center on soft skills. So if they ask a question about either customer, coworker, or boss, if it's a customer, it's definitely going to have something to do with the customer not being happy, and they want to know that you know how to focus on the problem. In any question that they ask you, they want to know that you're solutions oriented, whether it's the customer, the coworker, or the boss. If it's a customer question that they frame, they're going to say, tell me about a time when you had to deal with a difficult customer, you had to deal with a customer that wasn't happy. Of course, the customer is going to be, a little bit unruly, and they wanted to know how you handled that situation. So what you're going to do on your little cheat sheet, because you're going to take your little notepad, because it'll help jog your memory, unless you just have, you don't feel like you need to create a cheat sheet. You're going to think about a time like, did I ever have a time where I had to deal with a customer and they were, a bit unruly? Oh, yeah, I remember I dealt with that guy, Sam. What they want to know from that story is that regardless of Sam's behavior, because obviously Sam is upset, he's not mad at you, he's just mad at the situation, that you know how to cut through the noise, focus on the issue, and be solutions oriented. So whatever it is, you listen to Sam, you heard him out. Once Sam was satisfied that you heard his concerns, you and he focused on how to solve the issue. You gave some alternatives, and Sam walked away satisfied. That's all they want to know. Businesses are in the business of making money. They're not in the business of psychiatry, psychology. They just want to know, I don't care how crazy Sam is, can you deal with the issue and get it done and move on? They want you to be solutions oriented. So if you have a story like, yeah, I remember that time I was working at T-Mobile and this customer, Sam, was upset. Okay, I'm just going to put Sam down on my paper because that's the story I'm going to tell if they ask me to tell me about a time that I had to deal with a customer. Now, if they say instead, tell me about a time you had a coworker, 9 times out of 10, that coworker is going to be underperforming. Um, Very few times will they put you in like a sexual harassment type situation. Most times it's going to be the coworker is underperforming in some way, and they want to know what you're going to do. What do they want to hear? They want to hear that you know how to be a team player. They want to hear that you're going to go and offer your services to support that team member. So they don't want to hear, oh, obviously you had to rat Sam out or you had to pull his weight and do it for him. They don't want to hear that. They want to hear that you went and you offered up your services. So if you can think of any time you had to work with a coworker, it doesn't even have to be direct type of work. It could be, Timothy broke his leg and he needed a ride into work. And so, you wanted to make sure that he had a ride in because you guys had a project, you had to close out something, and, it was important that he be there. So you were a good team member. Or, let's say Timothy was in the hospital and maybe you did have to cover his shift, or you offered up your services to Ralph because Ralph, was having a hard time with that inventory that you guys had to do at the end of the night, and he didn't really know how to do the inventory. So you offered up your support. That's all they want to know. Do you know how to support your team? If you've ever been and played sports before, if you ever been in any type of team dynamic, you already know how that goes. So they just want to know that you know how to support a team member, regardless of the situation, that you're going to start there first, as opposed to, trying to cover for the person or telling on them. If they frame a question around, tell me about a time you had to deal with a manager, 9 times out of 10 is going to be the manager gave you too much work to do. Managers, get confused. A lot of times they forget who they gave what to. They're one person, and they could have 20, 30 people working for them. They want to know that you know how to do what we call manage up. You know how to go back to your supervisor and say, hey, Tim, I wanted to, touch base with you really quickly because I see that you had gave us this project, but I know we have a deadline that's coming up. And I just want to make sure that we're going to finish out, that deadline project before we jump on this. So do you want me to pivot and do both? Now here, is a extra. If you can give Tim a solution to the issue, even better. So if they say, tell me about a time when, you had a supervisor that was giving you conflicting, stories, or you guys had a lot of different projects, how did you handle it? They wanted to know if you can think of a time where, oh yeah, I remember a time where, we had these two different projects. They didn't really know what to do. You offered up a solution to your boss. Can you offer up solutions? That's all they want to hear. So regardless of whether it is a manager scenario, a coworker scenario, or a customer, remember, solutions based. So if you can think of any situation where you had to be, a problem solver and offer up solutions, those are the stories that you want to tell. They may ask all three. Most times they'll only ask one or two, right? They may ask one and just ask a follow-up question. So you just want to be prepared for that. If you're really good at on thinking on the fly and you already have them in your head and you don't want to write it down, don't. But for me, sometimes I get really nervous. So I'll have a little cheat sheet, so I'll have like Sam and Timothy, that they don't know what it means, but I know what that means, so if they ask me a question about a customer, I'm going to do Sam. If they ask me a question about a boss, I'm gonna tell the Timothy story. Now, the next set of questions are what we call stress-related questions or hypothetical questions. These questions are future-based, so they're going to center on the position that you're in. They're going to be hypothetical because and they're hypothetical because they typically start with, what would you do if? Right? So this is why it's so important to do your research on that position, right? Go to their website, read their job description really well, really well. I would even do some Google search on, the type of day-to-day work you'll be doing. Obviously, you're learning it. So your sorry, I thought I heard some. Okay, I thought I heard something. Sorry. Your instructors are going to be telling you day to day what you're going to be doing. So, just get a good sense of what the day-to-day work is of that type of position. They still are going to center on those three scenarios. It's still going to be a customer, a coworker, or a boss. Most times it's going to be a customer or a coworker because they don't really want to put themselves and say, okay, what would you do if I gave you too much work? So 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a coworker or a customer. If it is an environment where you're not dealing with residential, maybe you're dealing with commercial, then the customer still could be like a contractor or project based. So the customer still could be, customer in the larger sense of the project customer. They're going to, say if you're going to, let's say you're working for a utilities company and you could be working for the, Duke Energy or something, right? In this situation, it's probably going to be customer based. they're going to obviously tell you you're probably going to be a customer who's upset that you cut off their electricity, or maybe they caught you outside or something crazy, or like that. What are you going to do? You're going to do the same thing that you would do, even in those behavioral based questions. You're going to obviously be polite. You're going to listen to them. You're going to explain to them, what happened. But then if you can offer up a solution, because everything is solutions based, even if it's you need to pay your bill, or here's what you can do, or here's a number you can call. The worst thing that you can ever do to somebody that's upset is be like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, that's the worst thing you can do, right? You always want to show empathy. So if you can do anything to be solutions based and give that person, what they can do to rectify the situation, that's what they want to hear. Do you know how to think, in terms of being a problem solver? Same thing if it's a coworker, so depending upon the type of position it is, you have to think about, okay, how will I be working with my coworker? 9 times out of 10, it's probably going to have something to do with time management, project management. Um, the coworker could be underperforming, just in that type of environment that they're in. How would you handle it? You're going to handle it similar to how you've handled, any coworker in the past, just putting yourself in that situation. Um, so just know that these questions, they're really, really centered around your soft skills, right? The only difference with these stress related questions is they're just placing you in the scenario. You know, they may ask you a question, that's technical, and in terms of like, what would you do if, maybe you had a 12 step. I mean, electrical, I don't, but maybe you had a 12-step system you had to go through, and then maybe something was faulty, or, something didn't work. Do you know what to do, right? So they may ask you some of those type of technical questions, but for the most part, it will primarily center around soft skills. Now, there are certain questions they should never ask. Sometimes, the supervisors, that the hiring managers, we also call them supervisors, hiring managers, you know, outside of HR, they're trained, they know what to ask, what not to ask. But you'd be surprised, there's a lot of supervisors or managers, especially if they own their own business, sometimes they forget that they shouldn't ask certain questions. you know, it may seem obvious to you that they shouldn't ask you what your age is, your disability, ethnicity, gender, marital status, or religion. Maybe you grade very early in life. There's people that have gray hair at 12, you know, and maybe it's a very physical position, and so maybe you have a hair full of gray, and they're concerned. They're not going to be like, how old are you? Or or maybe sometimes they try to get slick and say, oh, did you go to so and such high school? you know you want to be careful with those questions, because you don't know that person, and you don't know if they're trying to be biased or not, right? So hopefully they should, I mean, you can decline the answer, but it should give you a red flag if they try to inquire about any of these things, because there could be a chance that they're trying to be biased, and hopefully you don't want that. Hopefully you don't come into that situation, but they should know better, because that is illegal. Everything on this screen is illegal. They should not ask. People have sued companies for violating their rights in an interview. I've seen it happen, and like I said, most of these supervisors don't know better, but so the HR person, I'm sure, has trained them. Hey, don't ask any of these questions. I don't care if this person comes in on crutches. They can't assume that you can't do the job. Maybe you were playing basketball and you hurt yourself, and you'll be fine next week, right? So they could be like, oh, are you okay? You be, oh, yeah, I'm fine. And you can offer up whatever you want to offer up, but they should steer from those questions, right? Particularly because you just don't know how people are going to, um, judge you on that. You could think it's something very, very innocent. Sometimes something that starts out very innocent can backfire. You're interviewing with this person, and they have a baby picture up, and they just say, oh yeah, I just came back off of, maternity, with my wife, we just had a baby. Maybe you and your wife, or you and your husband, or whomever had just had a baby, and you're tempted to say that too, but you don't know that the manager really is mad that the person was out so long, and now here you come with the baby, and you happen to mention it, and they're so happy, and they mention it to that person, and the person looks at it negatively. So because they may be thinking, oh, now I got two people with really young kids that's going to be wanting time off, right? So just because you don't know these people, you don't know the environment, you want to be careful and not offer up any personal information if you can help it about yourself. It's just unfortunate. That's how people are. People can be biased. Now, what can you ask, right? You really want to try to ask your questions throughout the interview because you don't really want to let on that anything is an issue, right? So let's say, for example, you noticed in the job posting that the job is supposed to be in Fort Myers, but you notice there was some training in Tampa, that they had this training office in Tampa. And so you were curious, like, am I going to have to go to Tampa to train? Like, you want to ask your questions discreetly because you don't want them to think it's an issue. I hate to say it again, but you just don't want them to draw any bias. Maybe the person may seem really cool, but they're going to go back and they're going to report everything you said, just like a police officer, to their main person. And so you just don't know how that will be conveyed. So if you have any questions, try to ask them in a very non-discreet way. So, going back to, you've done the research, you saw that they were training in Tampa. Maybe that's an issue for you. Maybe it's not, but it's something that you want to know. When they start talking about the company, right? Oh, well, let me tell you a little bit about the company in this position, and it'll be that, and it's going to be a big project, in Fort Myers. And you say, oh, well, we'll be training in Tampa. I saw you guys had a training in Tampa. Oh, no, no, no. Your team will, you guys won't be training in Tampa. Y'all will be training in Fort Myers. You could check that off your brain. Thank God, right? Maybe that was an issue for you. You got one of your questions asked. You can always ask, towards the end is good to say, oh, where are you guys in the hiring process? Maybe you want to know, am I the first person that they've interviewed, or am I the last person? You need to know that. You need to know how aggressively you need to continue to look for different jobs, right? So if you're the first person, right, then what happens? That means that you're going to have to wait for them to do their interviews. Could be 3 weeks from now. You're going to continue to look for work. I mean, you should look for work anyway. But if you're the last, right? So if they say to you, oh, we're just finalizing everything, you're our last person, or we only have one more person besides you, and we hope to make a decision by next week. Perfect. Those are perfect questions to ask. Um, you can ask, if they, how many projects you're on. You may say, I noticed in the job description it said, and talk about this once they're talking about the position. So if you're like in the stress related question section of the interview, and they say, okay, well, here's a little bit about the position and what you'll be doing, and and maybe you had a question because it said projects, and you're concerned, like, am I going to be on multiple projects? Am I going to be having to go from this site to that site? You just want to know. Not that it could or could not be an issue for you. Maybe someone drops you off at work and picks you up. So if you got to jump from site to site, that may be something you want to know. So when they're talking about the position, at the top of the hour, they'll talk about the company. When it gets down to the nitty gritty questions, the stress related questions, they'll start talking more about that position. That's where you'll ask that question. Oh, okay. So will there be multiple projects? Because I thought I read that. Yeah, there are multiple projects, but we're for the first 3 months, you'll only be working on this project. And then the second 3 months, you'll be working on that project. You got that question answered. Why is it that you want to be discreet? You don't ever want to let on that anything is or isn't an issue, right? Because you don't know if something could rub that person the wrong way. Maybe the person that left was upset that they had to work on multiple projects. So if you give any indication that anything is an issue, the person could judge you for that. What you want to do is gather all your data. When they say, do you have any other questions? You want them to be questions that, have nothing to do with, whether you like the company or not, whether something's an issue or not, but simple stuff like this, where are you in the hiring process? If they do overtime, maybe overtime's a big deal for you because that's how you get your extra income. And they're talking about these multiple projects. There you can just interject and make it very casual, right? You're hoping they do overtime, but you don't want them to feel like you have to have it, right? So you can say, oh, multiple projects. So are y'all looking at like 50, 60 hours during that time? Or, oh yeah, man, sometimes it's 80 hours, but for the first 2 weeks, we haven't really gotten started on that other project yet. So you'll just be working 40 for the first couple of weeks, and then it's going to double real fast. That's good for you to know. That way you can say, okay, my money may look funny for the first couple of weeks, but then after that, I need to, plan accordingly. Again, it's not that you're trying to be, anything. It's just when you're meeting people for the first time, they're going to compare your questions and answers to the next person that's before you and after you. So that is why you want to be as impartial as possible until you get in the job and you can really see what's what, right? That's my best advice to you. Clearly, you don't ever ask about money. Why is that? The same way that they're going to take all your answers and they're going to go back and they're basically going to score them and look at you compared to other people. Then they're going to decide, who's the best person for the job? Well, I really like this person because he had a lot of teamwork. He actually has done some teamwork in the past, and we are looking for a team lead. So I think this guy will really make a good candidate. Now the position said they pay between 25 and 40. You're hoping to get 30. So they say because he's had some of that team experience, hey guys, I think we should start him at 32. So what does that mean? That means they have no idea how much they're going to pay you on the front end because they haven't even spoken to you yet. That's why you don't talk about salary. The only time salary ever comes up is if the HR person, because they have a really tight budget or because for whatever reason they hire everybody coming in at the same rate, will tell you, hey, hard stop guys, we start everybody at 25. Are you okay with that? Then the only thing you need to do then is once you're in the interview, make sure that that job is worth 25. That's what you, if the person has told you on the front end, we start at 25. So why am I still interviewing? Well, I'm interviewing number one, clearly to see what the job is about, but I'm also interviewing to see if this is a $25 an hour job, right? Because you don't want to, nobody wants to start work and be upset because you're doing a $40 an hour job and they only want to pay 25, right? So you want to listen closely and be a little bit more, you know, um, thoughtful in your decision making and asking those critical questions if they give you a dollar amount right out the gate. Sometimes they're doing that in a way because they know when they hire new people they can always start low. Companies do that. They do that, unfortunately. But sometimes it's you truly are doing an entry level job, and in that sense it's fine. um, so you also want to go back home and decide, okay, how much do I want to work? How much do I want to get paid? So like I said, initially you were thinking, okay, $30. You go back home, okay, given everything that they've said, is it really a $30 an hour job? Okay, I think it is. Once they decide what they want from you, they're going to have HR send you an offer letter and say, oh, we really enjoyed talking to you. We want to offer you 32. You're going to be like, hot diggity doggone it. Thank goodness I didn't say 30. So that's why you want to wait to after they do their deliberation and then tell you. Now, sometimes they may come back and say 27. In the back of your mind, you want to already know it's kind of like negotiating what your floor is, right? So if you wanted 30, but maybe you can go down to 26, they offer 27, fine, right? You could say fine. Now, once you get into your career, you should negotiate. I'm not going to tell anybody to negotiate when they're first starting out. I don't want anybody to say, Miss Taylor told me don't take this job to negotiate. Once you get into your career, it's you should negotiate, right? This first go round, you're first starting out, especially if career services is recommending you to a job, they should tell you, most times those jobs that they recommend have a starting rate. Maybe you can't negotiate so much in that instance, but moving forward after that, you definitely should be negotiating. All right. So this is one of the reasons why we want you guys to prepare. Like, one great thing that you can do, especially with those stress related questions, is to do your research. You can go and Google online stress related questions for typical electrical interview questions, and then they'll list them out. You can even do typical hypothetical stress related questions for the engineering. AI is really good at that, and you can see the type of questions that they ask, because I'm going to tell you right now, most companies Google the questions to ask you. They have maybe 5 questions they want to ask because they just really, especially the supervisor, they just want to ask the job, right? They don't do interviewing for a living. So they're just going to go download some questions, or HR is going to give them some standard questions anyway. 9 times out of 10, it'll be the same thing that you Google yourself. But in addition to practicing, I would say Google those questions. Clearly, it's so important. Everybody knows the night before to get enough rest, wake up early because you may have to go through security. You don't want to be late. The worst thing that you can do is be late for an interview. All right. So I was going to do a mock interview video, but nobody's really here, so I'm not going to do that. So let me go ahead and give you your mock your question for tonight. So tonight, here's what I want you to think, and this is another reason why I want you guys to really, really always be using your long-term goal as your true north. Thinking about your long-term goal. Okay, my long-term goal is to become a master electrician. What type of company do I want to go work for, right? I want to be a master electrician. I'm sure your instructors are telling you, okay, if you want to be a master electrician, these are the things that you need to do. Step one, step two, step three. What type of company am I looking for should be the next step. So I want you to think of 3 things that you are looking for in a company, that relate to your career. 3 things that are going to be very, very important to you. Maybe it's training. Maybe it's important to you that they're national because you want to move to New York. Maybe it's how big the company is because you want to stay at the company for a long time and you want to be able to work your way up. So what are the 3 things that are important to you at a company? That is your question for tonight. Please remember tomorrow is your midterm. So technically, tomorrow is your midterm. What does that mean? That means that just like if you were to come into your classroom, your teacher may take roll, they may ask you a few questions, and then it's going to be exam time. Same thing for us. The only difference is we just won't have a live session. So what'll happen is when you come here tomorrow, I'll talk very briefly about a few things. I'll still give you a conference question. And then when that first 5 minutes, I'm going to release you guys to go take your test. Does that mean you have to take your test? Then it doesn't. Some people have already started their test. As long as you take that test by Sunday, you're fine. But tomorrow, just like all assignments have certain due dates, tomorrow is your midterms date. So we have to give you that time back to take your test, just in case you do want to use it. And it will take you, some people it takes a few hours to do it. It is open book, but if you're searching through the book, you need time to do that. So that's why we give you back that time. All right. So that is all I have for you tonight. If you don't have any other questions for me, I will talk to you tomorrow. Have a good night.